Donald Trump, he is godlike. He's been put on earth to be our Jesus Christ, to guide us.
And they still don't call him a politician. They call him a businessman.
And yet they think he has a Midas touch. A lot of people would argue, actually, he's got the reverse Midas touch. What is gold, he turns to dust.
So didn't anyone actually believe he was going to do this stuff? And if not,
why
not? Because he spelt it out. We are now living through Donald Trump's sort of head, quite frankly. His imagination is playing out in real time.
There's been some public sparring between Elon Musk and the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, on some of these tariffs. Musk actually referred to Navarro today as being, quote, dumber than a sack of bricks. Are you at all, or is the administration, the president, all concerned that this is maybe impacting the public's understanding of these tariffs? It might be messing with the message on it?
No, look, these are obviously two individuals who have very different views on trade and on tariffs. Boys will be boys, and we will let their public sparring continue. And you guys should all be very grateful that we have the most transparent administration in history. And I think it also speaks to the president's willingness to hear from all sides, that he has people at the highest levels of this government in this White House who have very diverse opinions on very diverse issues, but the president takes...
That was Caroline Leavitt, Trump's press secretary. She's not hiding the fact there are deep divisions in the administration right now over this cataclysmic new policy of Donald Trump's. But when she says boys will be boys, she's not talking about a spat over a football in a playground. She's talking about something that is destabilising the entire world.
And on one side of it, you have Elon Musk calling the architect of Donald Trump's signature policy, tariffs, a moron. Musk is close to saying this is moronic. So how does the US administration carry on when there are such deep splits over such a fundamentally important subject? Welcome to the Newsagents USA.
The Newsagents USA.
It's John.
It's Emily. And we are not yet a week in to Liberation Day. We have just seen the implementation of the tariffs as of this morning. And that involves a China retaliation and a US retaliation on China, which puts tariffs at the sort of uncalculable 104% rate right now. At this point, the numbers almost start being meaningless. We cannot really imagine what this looks like in terms of the increase on prices for consumers. But I think it is starting to show us where the political cracks are appearing. And if we told you that Elon Musk is now calling Trump's trade secretary Pete Retardo on Twitter, you get a sense of how, as you heard, transparent the hatred between two of those key architects now is.
I mean, look, on previous episodes of the Newsagents USA, we have talked about how Elon Musk is now almost the most powerful man in the world, the most powerful non-elected man in the world, because of his proximity to power and the license that Donald Trump has given him. And he is taking on the man who Donald Trump wants to be the guide, the guru of the tariffs policy. This is not small potatoes. This is absolutely fundamental to the battle that is going on now within the White House over what should happen on this signature policy when the markets are tanking and everything is pointing in the wrong direction. And of course, for the MAGA faithful, this is a test of their faith, of the religion that is Donald Trump. And you kind of had all sorts of people coming out and saying, look, if Donald Trump says that this is the best for America, I'm going to take the hit. My 401k, my pension might be down in value, but I still believe. But there are many who don't. And it was interesting listening to a congressional committee.
Yeah, I mean, just to spell this out, the row essentially evolved because Pete Navarro, essentially the guy who's planning and doing and enacting all these tariffs, went on the airwaves and said Elon Musk is not actually a car manufacturer, he's a car assembler. And by that, what he meant was that Elon Musk gets the parts for his cars from loads of different places around the world. In other words, he tried to say that Musk is part of the problem because he creates these imbalances, he brings things into the US to make his cars as opposed to having them made in the US. Elon Musk then responds by saying, what an absolute liar. But fundamentally here, you have the clash between an ideologue in the shape of Navarro and a realist, somebody who actually wants to make money and has done so very successfully, in the shape of Elon Musk. And that's why these two are locking horns now, because Musk just wants to be allowed to make his cars. You've seen a 45% drop in Tesla share numbers in recent weeks because his image has hurt his own stock. You've seen countries around the world say, I'm not sure we want your Starlink anymore, Elon Musk. Elon Musk realises that the tariffs thing is going to put him out of business if it carries on at this rate. And Navarro simply doesn't care.
Well, Navarro is someone who believes, I don't care if the world burns. At the end of it, we will have a better America. There are an awful lot of Americans who are thinking, hang on, but I'm here now, living in this world. I don't want to burn. I don't want the house to burn down. I don't want my car to burn down. I don't want my my factory to burn down. And yet, potentially, that is what is going to happen. And the state of the real economy in America, more and more people are predicting recession. Some are talking about a slump. Some are talking about a depression. You know, back to the 1930s, back to what happened the last time America tried widespread tariffs after the Smoot-Hawley tariffs came in, at the end of the 1920s. And this is what America is dealing with. And so, not surprisingly, you are seeing cracks appearing in the once solid MAGA coalition, with more and more people coming out and saying, I've got my faith. I love you, Donald. I believe in you. Are you quite sure about this? I mean, I thought, tell you what, Ted Cruz, who has been the most loyal person about Donald Trump,
well, on and off.
On and off. But in recent
But in this round, yes.
Listen to him last night with Sean Hannity.
President Trump has the opportunity for the most extraordinary economic win for the American people right now by making a deal, by saying, let's cut a deal. But on the other hand, and I do want to give a word of warning, there are voices in the administration that rather than take a deal are saying we want to have tariffs as a long-term permanent feature of the economy. I think that'd be a mistake. If a year from now, our trading partners have all jacked up tariffs on America and we have high tariffs on everyone, I think that'll hurt this country.
Just read between the lines, because when Ted Cruz says Donald Trump has the opportunity, what he's saying is he can make this better, but he's not right now. He has to correct what's going on because it's not looking good now. And he is aiming his fire at Navarro. And pretty much, I mean, don't forget just how many billionaires there are in or around Trump, right? These guys are all facing losses to their books as we speak, whether it's Zuckerberg, whether it's Bezos, whether it's Musk, whether it's all the ones that are actually inside the administration working with him and for him, they're all seeing this hit. And so, yes, Ted Cruz has come out and said, you need to correct the course. We also heard from a Democrat who I think posed the question that maybe 98% of the world is asking at a select committee hearing yesterday.
The U.S. economy has gone from the envy of the world to a laughingstock in less time than it took to finish March Madness. Through it all, Donald Trump and his advisors have yet to provide an understandable explanation. Any explanation for what his tax hike on the American people is supposed to accomplish. And so this morning, I'd like to focus on one central question. What is the plan? In the last week, the White House has been all over the map when it comes to this question.
Yeah, what is the plan? The reference to March Madness. For our non-American listeners and our non-college basketball fans, it is the great college basketball tournament that takes place every March with these fantastic colleges battling it out for the NCAA tournament and who is going to be crowned the prime basketball team. And you do your brackets. You kind of work out who is going to win each bracket and you try to work out who's going to be the final and who is going to win. That is March Madness in 23 seconds.
But the point is, he's saying that might be complicated. It's nothing to what's going on right now.
Completely. And what is the potential to the US economy? What is the potential to the rest of the world? And where you have seen China willing to take America on, America being utterly dismissive of what weapons the Chinese have to hurt America. And it turns out that China can hurt America, and America can hurt China. America can hurt the world alike.
You asked a really interesting question a moment ago, which is, what do you do if you are a MAGA fundamentalist? If you have grown up in this world of Trump to the point where you think he's absolutely infallible, where you have bought into the fact that he won the election in 2020, which he didn't. You have bought into the fact that you should deport people that you can call criminals even if they have no criminal records or convictions. That you have bought into the world where the Jan 6 convicts are actually hostages. When you're looking at this now, and this is, as you say, hitting people's savings, hitting people's spending, hitting people's prices for everyday goods, how are they rationalising what's going on? And I think that is one of the most kind of exciting, like scary questions at the moment. How long do you keep believing in this man who is damaging your daily life?
I think that for so many people, you know, I hate using the phrase cult-like, because I think it's sort of glib and I think it's patronising. I think it says that people don't understand what they were voting for in November. But there is a devotion to Donald Trump I have never seen to anyone else in elected politics in kind of the decades I've been doing elected politics. You know, you like certain politicians, you think they're good, but Donald Trump, you know, he is godlike. He's been put on earth to be our Jesus Christ, to guide us.
And they still don't call him a politician, they call him a businessman.
And they call him a businessman who is one of the most successful businessmen in the country. He is not. He went bankrupt a lot of times. Yeah. A lot of the things that Donald Trump's been involved with have gone to pieces. So, you know, and yet they think he has a Midas touch. You know, a lot of people would argue, actually, he's got the reverse Midas touch. What is gold, he turns to dust. And at the moment, the golden legacy of the US economy is potentially being vaporised by these measures, which are ill thought through and ill considered and doing grave damage to America's own economy. It's standing in the world. Allies are kind of holding their hands up in horror as if to say, what on earth are you doing? We're your friends.
Yeah. And one of those friends actually was a very rich, very successful financier, Bill Ackman, who has now moved into the language of despair. I mean, he's actually talked about, was it a nuclear winter?
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about the winter of discontent. In America, that's, 100 times bigger. And he's now said on Twitter, on X, I assumed economic rationality would be paramount. My bad. Isn't that interesting? If you look at Wall Street, if you look at what the markets were doing before the announcement of the tariffs, just in the days before Liberation Day came in, whatever, I should be using that in quotation marks, but I'm not now because it's sort of generally accepted. The markets did not seem to register what was about to hit them. They were kind of floating along quite happily. And now people are turning around and saying, so didn't anyone actually believe he was going to do this stuff? And if not, why not? Because he spelt it out. I mean, he spelt it out for the last 3 decades, quite frankly. He's had a Bruegge's. He has had a deeply vindictive conviction about China, about tariffs, about America unfairness, and about how it's all been, the whole country's been ripped off. And I think people heard him say it and heard him talk about Liberation Day, but the markets weren't responding to that. On Monday and Tuesday, they were kind of going along quite steadily. And then he says it and they're like, oh, God, you mean it? Right? You're going to do this. And now he's done it, which is why you've seen drops of, 12% on the Hang Seng, why you've seen the Standard & Poor in America, why you've seen the drops all over the European markets, really showing us how unhappy and unstable the world now feels.
Well, at the same committee where we just heard the Democratic senator, we heard from Tom Tillis, who's a Republican from North Carolina, ex-management consultant. And he kind of used a management consultant's phrase, so essentially, where does the buck stop with this policy? And he's questioning the US trade representative who is there representing...
Sweating,
who's representing the US administration's position.
I'm not a trade expert, and I'm not going to question it at this point. I do have a question about, at the end of the day, the other thing in management consulting we like to focus on is this concept of one throat to choke. In other words, when you're finally taking a look at a strategy, someone has to own it. And you can't say that it's the president or the vice president. So my first question to you, in this scenario, the decision maker who decided the alla prima approach, who has obviously had to have spent time anticipating what we saw in the markets and some of the pushback, I'm assuming this all got gamed out because it's a novel approach, it needed to be thought out. Whose throat do I get to choke if this proves to be wrong?
Well, Senator, you can certainly always talk to me, but
are you at the tip of the spear?
Well, I'm at the tip of the spear for certainly.
Did you propose the alla prima approach?
I mean, there's somebody literally laying down his life for Donald Trump, right? Politically.
But just exactly what you were saying a moment ago. If you went to any Trump rally, listened to any Trump speech, Trump has made this his signature policy. It is the one thing he has been consistent about over 40 years. He believes in tariffs. You can blame it on Navarro. You can blame it on the guy there. You can blame it on anyone else you want to see, Robert Lighthizer or whoever. This is Donald Trump's signature policy. This is Donald Trump's own thing. I do not see how, if the US administration is forced into a climb down, a U-turn, whatever you want to call it, how the buck can stop with anyone but Donald Trump.
Yeah, he's sort of done a favour, hasn't he, to A-level students all over the country by showing what happens if you make the unimaginable a policy. And we are now living through Donald Trump's sort of head quite frankly. His imagination is playing out in real time. And markets are having to adjust to what one man thinks is a good idea, even when everyone around him is telling him to back off.
He is a kid with a box of matches in a petrol station where there's petrol on the forecourt, and not surprisingly, there's a fair chance this could all go up in flames.
In a moment, we're going to be talking to Democratic Congressman Sean Casten. How should the Democrats deal with Trump's tariffs? And is there a way they can stop them?
Well, we are joined now by Democratic Congressman Sean Casten from Illinois' 6th Congressional District. And Congressman, great to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking the time. I see that you are trying to kind of spearhead moves to overturn Trump's tariffs. Can it be done?
So thank you for having me on. It is very easy to get it done because our Congress and our government has checks and balances in it. All you have to do is have Congress do what their oversight. Trump has been imposing these tariffs because he says that we are in some sort of a national economic emergency. I'm not sure on what that's based, but when he asserted those emergency powers, he imposed the tariffs. Congress can declare that we are not in an emergency. If we find a half dozen Republicans who are committed to facts and have the character to do it, we can end it. Now, what is hard, and I was talking yesterday with some money managers who said that when COVID came, it was a fairly easy analytical problem because they could look at every business and say, what's your revenue? How much revenue is it lost? How much cash do you have? And if I divide the one by the other, does that give me an amount of time where there's likely to be a vaccine? And they could reallocate their portfolios accordingly. And he said, in this scenario, we don't know how to do that math. And I said, what you're basically saying is that you think that it is easier to invent an entirely new vaccine to an entirely unknown disease, previously unknown disease, than it is to find a half dozen Republicans of character. I'm not sure you're wrong, but that is the working assumption in financial markets right now, which is frightening. But it is fixable.
Do you have faith in Congress? Do you think you can find 6 Republicans on your side?
Today is going to be an interesting day. There is a lot of internal conflict within the Republican caucus. Over the course of the prior term, they consistently fought with each other, and so they were never able to get any funding bills passed. Today, we're going to have a rule vote on a budget measure. And the difference between now and then is that Donald Trump is trying to roll them. And so the question we're going to find is, are we going to have Republicans who have said that they are opposed to this, but are they going to vote that way on the floor if that means standing up to Donald Trump? And I don't know. Historically, that's been a much harder lift for them. On the other hand, they're getting yelled at when they go home. They're getting yelled at town halls. They're getting yelled at by people who have traditionally been their base. military veterans, farmers, people who are getting hurt by these tariffs, people who don't like that the VA is being cut, people who are nervous about cuts to our healthcare system that are particularly hurting rural America. Maybe there's a point where they come to fear that more than they fear Trump, but I don't know.
So just explain something to me, because Donald Trump has said that even if Congress does say the tariffs have got to stop, I'm going to veto that. I'm not going to sign any measure that says I can't do this.
And yes, we would have to have a veto-proof majority to make that happen.
So that means you need 2/3 of congressmen and women to vote for it, and 2/3 of the Senate.
Yes. Now, having said that, I don't want to rain on your parade, but Donald Trump is not always a truth teller, right? So it's one thing that he's saying it. We'll see what happens. If you have significant Republican but non-veto proof Republican opposition, it does put him in a difficult position. We'll see what happens in that case. But again, like, this shouldn't be controversial, right? I mean, this is a completely fabricated problem with a completely fabricated solution. I mean, why in God's name are we imposing tariffs on Madagascar? Like, there is no logic. There is no constituency that says we are losing business to those currency manipulating Madagascarians. The reason why we put tariffs on Madagascar is because they did this really dumb formula that confuses a trade imbalance with a tariff. And so they looked at Madagascar on their formula. They said, well, Madagascar imports a lot of chocolate and coffee to the United States. They don't buy very much from the United States. Therefore, in their logic, we must impose tariffs to counter them. Yeah. All that does is make coffee and chocolate more expensive.
Well, I hate to point this out, but you've got a 10% tariff at the moment on an island with penguins. I mean, right? So that has now come in. And I guess none of this stuff makes sense. But the real question you're asking is, who's going to stand up and be counted? We heard earlier from Ted Cruz, who was on Fox News, saying that Trump had an opportunity to kind of do something about this. I mean, is Ted Cruz one of the Republicans that you would be speaking to that you think would come on board? I mean, is Tom Tillis, who's talked about who's going to be the person that, that is choked if this all goes wrong? I mean, are those men who you think will have a backbone over this?
I would remind you that when Donald Trump told Ted Cruz that his wife was ugly and his father killed JFK, Ted Cruz rolled over and endorsed him. Yeah. That's the amount of character that I expect from Ted Cruz, right? I expect no more character from him than his wife has learned to expect from him. So I don't know, right?
Ever the optimist.
It is shocking to have to say that, but when I was saying to one of my colleagues on the floor a while ago, one of these votes, he said, how are you doing right now? Genuinely asking, not just how are you doing? And I said, we're in this point where you look around this chamber and wonder how many people would I trust in a foxhole.
So you've got Donald Trump now having pursued this policy, and it's not just the tariffs and it's not just the impact of the tariffs. You're now seeing kind of spooky things happening in the bond market where, people are not buying US treasuries, they're selling them. Kind of always at a time of crisis, US government bonds are the safest place to go and people are shunning them. Is this the thing that could stop him? Even if, kind of America's three co-equal branches of government, if the judiciary can't stop him and the legislature can't stop him, maybe the markets can.
We'll see. It's very hard to predict. I think my working assumption is that Donald Trump is a very transactional person. And so you have to assume that there's something in it for him. I could be wrong about this. I don't have any great insight into his mind, but my working assumption is that his logic of the tariffs is if I hurt every country in the world and they all come back and ask what it would take for me to stop hurting them, they will give me something in return. I just think he's a very transactional person, and my guess is that what motivates him. I hope that we get through this before we get the kind of disruption in the markets you're talking about, and it may already be too late for that. As you noted, the foreigners were net buyers of U.S. Treasuries for 15 months that ended in November 2024. They've been net sellers since. November 2024 was, of course, when an election happened. And I think broadly speaking, the markets would like some certainty. They'd like to be able to plan. And
Yeah.
it's hard to plan on what the US government is doing when you have not just Donald Trump, but people around Donald Trump who have been selected either because they are incompetent or because they are competent like Marco Rubio, but will do whatever they're told. And so you don't have people, I think you've got markets right now looking out there and saying, one member of the cabinet says tariffs are to raise revenue. Another one says they're a negotiating tactic. A third says that they're to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. All those things can't be true. And I think what markets are looking at the United States right now, which I hate to say, is they're looking at us and saying there isn't really a strategy there. And for 100 years, we've counted on the U.S. being that strategy. I mean, I think the luckiest man in the world right now might be Mario Draghi, who is suddenly going to find himself with deeper European capital markets that he's been looking for, in spite of any structural reforms in Europe that he's been asking for.
Yeah, I mean, British viewers have seen this movie before, as you'll know. We went through this with Liz Truss, with our former Prime Minister, and looking back, she now seems
I hope that Liz Truss, did she outlast the head of lettuce? Because
she
if a head of lettuce can outlast Donald Trump, I'll feel better about this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the question, because Liz Truss tried to do something with tax cuts and borrowing, which hit her in the face, and it meant that she had to resign, because we have a parliamentary system that kicks people out if the markets tank, or if enough damage is being done to make people feel that they should lose their jobs. You don't have that system. So is there any mechanism? Is there any world in which Trump is punished for this?
Well, look, there's always the big eye. We can't impeach.
Again.
I would, Donald Trump is the only twice impeached president. Half of the impeachments that have ever happened in our country have been to Donald Trump. We should also note that no president has ever been removed after being impeached. That's a very high bar. So whether he's committed impeachable offenses or not, I think that's a no-brainer. Of course he has. Whether he would be removed, I think, we can't call snap elections here like you can in the UK. I think the most likely optimistic scenario, other than one driven by actuarial math, I suppose, for a 78-year-old man, is that what he does drives his popularity down sufficiently far that he is effectively neutered, and can't get things done because Congress stands up to him and stops him. We're a long way from that, but those sorts of things I think can happen very quickly.
Is there any world in which he pulls this off? Is there a world in which whatever the plan is, he sees it through? Manufacturing starts to come back. I don't know, people give in, people drop their tariffs against America. Is there any world in which he comes out with a win?
No. I mean, I look, the practical reality, these tariffs are massive. Like the day 2 weeks ago, the average US tariff on imported goods was 1.5%. We're now close to 30. Yeah. We have never had tariffs this high in our history. And that's, of course, before all the reciprocal tariffs start hitting. And so as a practical matter, the only thing that happens from that is massive reductions in consumption, collapsing US economy, spiking unemployment. Maybe 5-10 years in the future, we maintain this completely absurd 1890s view of economic policy, and we rebuild US manufacturing and make a bunch of stuff that we could have, more cheaply gotten from somewhere else, and we become isolated. But that doesn't happen. It takes a long time to build those factories, right? And by the way, we're still not making guacamole in the United States. We're still not growing coffee beans, right? I mean, there's just massive disruptions in our quality of life if that happens. And, I think what's scary to a lot of, people who, have more than a third grade education is that what we're much more likely to see is stagflation. Because if you've got the inflationary effect of tariffs, and the Fed has no tools because we can't sell treasuries, right? The market isn't there for them. We can't, the Fed's tools don't work in that world. And so they are creating a situation where, if they don't pull back from this, we're looking at inflation and high interest rates, which isn't good, and high unemployment, which isn't good for anybody, and it's real hard to get out of that trap.
So let me ask you the obvious political question that arises from what you've just described. You're describing a set of events that for the Republicans are catastrophic, even cataclysmic. Why aren't the Democrats doing better as a party? Why does it feel like there isn't that much Democratic leadership, around being the opposition to Donald Trump right now?
Well, keep in mind, we have a different circumstance than you do. We depend a lot more on where the will of the public is. We can't call snap elections. We don't have shadow governments, right? The Republicans control everything. We don't have shadow ministers who can form a shadow government. We don't have the budget. We don't have the people. What we do have is our outside voice and our bully pulpit. And certainly the April elections that we just came through, the municipal elections, was across the board massive gains for the Democrats. 15-point swings in a couple congressional districts that were there. The Wisconsin race that Elon Musk dumped, I think, $100 million to, the Democratic nominee won by 10 points in a state that went for Donald Trump. This is in a judicial race that will set the redistricting. So I think the mood of the country is very much moving in the right direction. Our ability right now, I mean, I say this for like me personally. I've got a bill that we introduced to block the ability of the Treasury Department to let Elon Musk access people's private data, because they hacked in and they took a bunch of data. It is insane that we allowed someone with such conflicts of interest to get access to the taxpayer information of every company who competes with him, right? That we now have, these 19, 20, 22-year-old kids who may in fact have information on foreign embedded agents working in hostile foreign governments who have been providing intelligence to the United States in exchange for payments from the Treasury, and we've hidden their identity. That information is now potentially out there. Those are huge problems. I can't get anybody in Republican leadership to agree that we should subpoena those people and find out where they are, to have a hearing, or to bring that bill to the floor. And in the minority, you can't do that. I can make noise about it. I can educate people. I think we're doing a good job of bringing that around. But when you're in the minority in our form of government, you don't control as much. And we got to find a way to get the grown-ups back in control, but we are not there right now.
Sean Casten, Congressman Casten, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been
Thank
great.
you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Before we go, a bit of a health update on the US and the measles outbreak, which has so far affected 500 people, mainly in East Texas. 50 have been hospitalized, 2 have died in what is seen as a growing crisis, with Americans refusing to take up the measles vaccination.
Yeah. Is it any surprise that the anti-vax movement is gaining steam when you have at the head of your government, at the head of the health department, a known anti-vaxxer in the shape of RFK? I was speaking to somebody in the heart of American government last week who said, cynically, I'm on team measles. And what he meant by that was, until you actually start to see what this is doing, you will not get how important it is. Right now, people who are sort of in the sane world of vaccination cannot believe that they are seeing people who find it incredibly hard to advocate a vaccine that children should have to live their lives safely.
Well, what about RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Health and Human Services Secretary? What does he make of this measles outbreak, and what Americans should do now?
The federal government's position, my position, is people should get the measles vaccine, but if the government should not be mandating.
Understand,
but I've always said during my campaign and every public statement I've made, I'm not going to take people's vaccines away from them. What I'm going to do is make sure that we have good science, so that people can make an informed choice.
OK, let's just rewind to check on all those public statements he's made in the past. This was when he was asked directly.
If your kids were young now, would you give them the measles, the mumps vaccine?
No.
OK, so that was
August 2024.
Yeah, long time ago.
Back in the distant histories of time.
Exactly. Does anyone remember that? It is extraordinary when you have the Secretary of Health who is making news by saying, I encourage people to get a vaccine. I mean, that is the new world we are living in, where the anchor, the presenter, the interviewer, thinks that he has got a newsline because RFK has said, yeah, might not be a bad idea to go and get the vaccine.
More on the new world that we're living in next week. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents USA.